Hello, everybody. I'm Miss Lisa, and welcome back to another episode of Woke Art for Kids. Today, we're going to be looking at Asian American voices, and I have selected the book Inside Out and Back Again by Thanhha Lai. This book is about a 10-year-old Vietnamese girl who lives with her mother and three brothers in Saigon. This is the only world she's ever known, and she loves it there. It's her home. She has many memories. And the war has been raging now for many years, and it's dangerous for them to stay. They realize that they will have to leave Saigon, and it's a very large decision. They can't take anything with them. They take very little with them. They can each choose one item, and the rest has to be burned so that there will be no evidence if anyone comes looking for them or finds out any information about their father who's missing in action. So the story goes from happy days in Saigon to a terrifying escape to relocation in Alabama, and about the new life for the family in the United States. So it traces the family from one Vietnamese New Year, their Tet, in Saigon, to the second Vietnamese New Year, which is now celebrated in the U.S. in a different way, of course. They tried to take some of their traditions with them. But so much has happened in this year. So much has happened. The story is written in free verse. It's not written in prose. It's in poetry. And that makes it really different because this 10-year-old girl has a voice who's expressing herself through poetry. And it's actually very effective because with poetry, you don't have to write so many words. You try to elicit images. And it works very well for a child who wouldn't have all of the historical background or the political understanding to be able to describe the events as an adult would. She leaves out a lot, and we still are very fully aware of what she goes through as she struggles to find her footing in a new country where she doesn't speak the language and where her family is misunderstood. So the project I'm going to introduce to you now has to do with papayas, because this was Ha's favorite fruit. She grew a papaya tree in the backyard, and the fruit was just ripening when they fled from their home. So this was a tree that she had grown from a seed many years earlier. Well, she's only 10, maybe a little while earlier. She threw a little papaya seed onto the ground, and it sprouted. And this tree grew into a fruit-bearing tree that was now over twice as tall as she was. So in this drawing / painting that I've done of the papaya tree, she's looking upwards to the fruit, and the leaves we're looking through the leaves like you would look up into a palm tree. I wanted to get that perspective of a child looking up, and she's very proud of this tree bearing fruit, and she was going to give the first ripened papaya to her mother, and there were 4 more papayas. So I'm assuming that her brothers could each have one, and she would have one too. But they never got that far because they had to flee, and so there were no papayas, but the theme of papaya reoccurs periodically throughout the book. And I think papaya Thanhha means memories of my homeland, memories of how the fun times that we had when I was growing up. And so this is the image that I wanted to weave into the art project about this book. I realized when I looked up images of papaya trees, they're actually quite difficult to draw because their leaves are very complicated shapes. But we'll get to that in a minute. I also wanted to put in a little bit of poetry because this is a book written in free verse. Free verse doesn't have a structure, doesn't have a specific way that it has to be written, but I added a small poem with a lot of structure. This is a haiku, and haiku I thought was okay to use because it was a form of poetry that originated in Japan, which of course is another Asian country. So I used the haiku because it's a very short poem, and I didn't want it to be as large as the image. I just wanted it to be there because the whole book is written in poetry. So the haiku says, haikus are, by the way, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. That's it. Very short poems. So the poem that I wrote to go along with this image, well, not just to go along with the image, but to go along with her changing life from Saigon, the place that she's always known, to going to America, a place she's never been. So the poem is, Yellow papaya, only memories we bring. Escape gray, unknown. And the reason I had written gray was because they fled on a Navy boat. And so we have the color of yellow, which is a very joyful color, and gray, which is a very sort of depressing color. And the only thing they can bring are their memories. So here we go. How do we draw a papaya tree? Well, the leaves themselves are what make the drawing complicated. They're very lacy, if you could say that, and they're large. And they grow on a long stalk, and then there's a large leaf. And up here, I just indicated that because we were looking up into the tree, that there were going to be lots, there were some in the foreground, but there were also more behind it. And then these ones are more single because we're not looking through the rest of the tree for these ones on the side. So how do we make this papaya leaf? They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parts that stick out. And they stick out from a central stem. And so you can think of a long line with almost a leaf shape at the end, and then 2 more leaf shapes that kind of go out at an angle, and then 2 more leaf shapes that are across from each other, and 2 more that angle inwards. Now this is all actually one leaf, but if we break it down into pieces, we can consider this a branch with 7 individual leaves. This is how I draw complicated things. I take it and I break it down into something that I can understand. And this works to think of it as a long stem with 7 different leaves around it. So let's try that. First, we're going to have the trunk. And I'm going to draw even more than this one. I want a trunk that kind of is wide at the bottom and goes narrower towards the top. Now the trunks are actually not this shape, but by drawing it this way, it looks like we're short and looking up into the tree. And that's the effect that I wanted to get. Now the papaya, this one here, we're looking straight on the end of it. So it's not going to look papaya shaped per se. And then there are two smaller ones, and this one is ripening nicely. They ripen from the bottom, yellow upwards as they ripen. So this one is fairly ripe. It's just got a little bit of green left. And then this one is also starting to ripen. You can see it's got a little bit of yellow at the end. And we're going to do this in ink pen and watercolor paints. Now let's start with some of these leaves. I'm just going to draw some of the stalks first. And they actually come out from behind. They come out from here, kind of like a palm tree. And then I'm going to start making these little individual leaf shapes. So I'm going to think about things that face downwards, things that are pretty much across from each other, things that face upwards, and then a large one in the center. Okay, so I'm going to think about things that face downwards, two across from each other, two facing upwards, and the large one in the middle. And they look like flowers now, but we will modify that as we go. Facing upwards and the one in the center. These face downwards, across from each other, upwards, and the one in the center. And when I say upwards, I'm saying that from the perspective of working up the leaf stalk, even if it's upside down. So this is up to me. Okay, so we've got facing downwards, facing across from each other, facing upwards, and the one in the middle, downwards, across from each other, upwards, and the one in the middle, downwards, across from each other, upwards, the one in the middle, downwards, across from each other, upwards, and the one in the middle. That's a very rough sketch. And now I'm going to turn these into little lacy shapes, because this is more what the leaves look like. They're actually fancier than this, but this will do. It gives us a feeling of the shape of the leaf. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be doing. And I'm just going to switch over now to my ink pen, because if I draw this all in pencil and then I trace over it all in ink pen, that's kind of a wasted effort. I know what I want to do now, so I'm going to switch over to this ink pen. That's sort of a mossy green. And these are Crayola water-soluble ink pens. And when I say water-soluble, I'm saying that on purpose, because I'm going to go back over this with some paint, and it's going to blend together because the pen themselves are water-soluble. So when we put water near them, they'll bleed a bit, and I like that effect. Because after all, this is a memory. This is not an image in a photograph. This is her memory. And I think I'm going to start with yellow, because I want to make these stalks yellow. Excuse me. And now I'm going to go into this shape. It's kind of relaxing. It'll take me a little while. Leaves are very good things to practice your drawing on because they're usually, they can be simple or they can be quite complex. And it's really good to have something complex to draw where you have to think about how to get to where you want to go. So if I didn't want a lot of detail in this, I could just leave those kind of flower shapes as they are and just paint them green. But by adding this sort of lacy edges, they look more complex, but they also look a little bit more realistic. And it adds interest. It's basically just a wavy line. If I was doing this a little bit slower, it would look more like a wavy line. So these face angled upwards. And this is the one in the middle. This one is angled downwards and downwards. And this one is across. This one is across. This one's angled upwards. Upwards. And the one in the middle. Okay, so that's a rough job with the pen. I'm going to take a look at the papaya here. We're looking right down onto it, and it's a nice big green papaya. And there's one here. And there's one here. And this one doesn't have much green on it. This is ripening nicely. This one is green. This one's more green. Let's take a look at the trunk. Let's get some trunk color in there. Ink pens are nice halfway between coloring with crayons that can take a while and painting with watercolors, which can be fast but a little bit out of control sometimes. This is a nice in-between. It goes fast, faster than coloring with crayons, but you have a little bit more control. So I'm going to start out with the ink pens, and then I'm going to switch over to watercolor after I establish my shapes and where I want my colors to be. A little bit more down there. Blend that in just a little bit, because this one's not quite so ripe. And then I'm going to put some shapes back here to indicate that there's more leaves, but not very much detail. We just want the feeling that there are leaves that we're looking into, but that they're not something that we can see easily because we're looking into the tree and they're kind of shaded by the leaves in front. I'm going to write my little haiku down here. Yellow papaya. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 syllables. And this tree, I should just mention, is not a short tree. It's just that we're right up close to it. We are viewing it like Ha might be viewing it. We're there, we're looking up, but there's a lot more of the trunk down below. So maybe the tree is actually this tall. Oops. Maybe it's this tall. Okay, I'm going to go into my green paint now, and I'm going to paint over some of these lines. And because the pens are water soluble, it'll soften my lines. I'm not trying to paint the shapes as I drew them. I'm just putting some color over them. And letting it mix with the water. I'm going to take my papaya, add some of the green to that as well. It really changes the feel of the drawing, doesn't it? And very quickly. You don't have to do too much with the paint. to give it a whole different feel. Okay, I need some yellow. And I'm going to let it blend in with that green. I need a little bit of green, yellow, some yellow green. Do these. I need some brown. I'm not going to get too detailed with the sky here. I want to keep it loose because sky can be a big chore. I don't want it to become that. I have to stay loose with the sky and use lots of water, and that'll keep the paint moving along. Otherwise, you might spend way too long on the sky. The blue makes the painting beautiful, but we don't need to spend an hour getting there. I can't imagine leaving at 10 years old my country, the place I've only ever known, to live somewhere where I don't speak the language, where I have no friends, where I have no idea how the culture works. But a lot of people have done that. They've done that, and they're still doing it. It's a lot of movement of people. A lot of people seek refugee status because it's dangerous for them to stay where they are. The escape itself was terrifying. And I should tell you that this book was written based on the experiences of the author. It's not a fiction, it's more of an autobiographical story that was embellished. She said she changed some things to make it perhaps more relatable to her audience, but that it was actually based on her own life and her own escape from Vietnam when she was 10. And when I get down to the poem, I'm just going to work around it. You can always turn your painting if you need to. Sometimes it's just easier to get into the shapes from a different angle. I was thinking as I was reading the book, I was thinking back to my high school days where we had students that would arrive from Thailand, from Cambodia, from Vietnam, and nobody ever talked about it really. Didn't tell us that they were fleeing any wars. They didn't tell us why they were there. They would just appear, and I feel bad that we never got a chance to get to know them. After reading this book, I just think, wow, we should have done something more to help them feel comfortable in their new country. Looks like my painting is finished. So here we go. We painted a memory. We painted Ha's papaya tree. And when we think about all of the trauma that she went through to leave her country, and more trauma when she got here and she felt like she didn't fit in. And then we saw her feeling more comfortable and learning English and being better able to be accepted. But all of that at such a young age must have been very, very difficult. And then, yes, quite a story. So be kind to people. Really, be kind to people. If you think that somebody doesn't have any friends and they don't speak English, maybe you can try to help them out just a bit. You don't have to speak their language. You can be friendly. You can try to help them with anything that they seem to be confused about, or maybe you can find somebody that can help them. So that's all from me right now. Take care, be kind, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.